Good morning still. It's good to see you all again, and thank you again very much. Ben told you we will be relying on the evidence rather than the hyperbole and the personal attacks, and he was right. The evidence in this case, simply put, is overwhelming and compelling. In the 6 weeks, we're going to try to show you as much as we possibly can. There are many, many, many photographs. Now, you heard Ms. Vasquez try to say, you can't trust those, it's not the originals. She's got that wrong. It's not from the original devices. Ms. Heard took all kinds of photographs, and her friends took photographs, and all of those remained on the cloud, and all of them have been imaged, and all of them have been examined by their IT experts, and they cannot discredit one photograph. Then she says, and it's got a photo editing thing. Well, all iPhones have the photo editing. It's where you can make it a little lighter or darker. You can move it to the center or not. That doesn't discredit the photographs, and we will have an IT expert who will testify that all of these are legitimate, authentic photographs. Not only that, but Ms. Heard produced all of her different devices over the years, including her most recent laptop, and they were pulled from many, many sources, and all of them are identical. So if she was going to go in and try to manipulate, she would have had to do it everywhere. And Ms. Heard will tell you she doesn't have that level of talent. There may be a couple of you on the jury who have that talent. She does not have that talent. They're all very legitimate photographs, and listen carefully to the evidence from the experts, and you will find every single piece is authenticated and is true. And they show bruises, and they show cut lips. They show hair pulled out of her hair. They show all kinds of, they show two black eyes when he headbutted her. Those are all going to be there. We also are going to show you a video, and I'll talk about the time frame of it. Ms. Heard took that on her iPad, and it was one day when she was in the kitchen with Mr. Depp, and it was February 10th, 2016, and he's on a tear, and he's going around, he's yelling at her and being abusive to her, and he's slamming the kitchen cupboards, and they're glass, and you can hear them rattling, and you can hear them breaking. Then he goes over with a big glass of wine, and he has a huge bottle of wine, and he pours more in there. And then she says, "Did you drink all of that?" And then he sees that she's videotaping him, and bam. That's going to be a pretty graphic one for you to see. Then you're going to hear audio tapes, which are pretty significant too. Ben told you about the May 2014 Boston plane incident, we call it, where he kicked her, where he was so drunk and he blacked out. Well, Amber audio taped him when he went to the back of the plane and passed out and was moaning loudly. You will hear that. You will also hear some other audio tapes that are very significant. One of them in Australia, at the end of the 3-day hostage situation. You will hear, apparently Mr. Depp turned on Ms. Heard's iPhone. She was never allowed to have a password, by the way. He would never let her do that during their relationship, but he must have inadvertently turned it on. There's 5 hours of audio tape. It's during the cleanup of all the broken glass and the liquor and the urine and the blood stains and everything else in that house. And you can hear his handlers talking about it. You can hear them talking about trying to find his finger. And that you can hear them say, "She's stone cold sober." You will hear all of that. It's very, very significant evidence. What this is going to tell you is the story of a very different Johnny Depp. It's one who is always, well, I can't say always, because he has the charismatic side that Amber fell in love with. But he has an enormous amount of rage. You will see the medical records and hear from the psychiatrist that talked to him for a while in 2014, where he admits that he has rage, that he's like a demon, that he views his wife, Amber, like his mother and his sister that he hates. That's what you will see. You will see that. And it'll be fueled by the alcohol and the drugs. Ben told you a little bit about that. You're going to see a list of his prescription drugs that his concierge doctor and team, who charge him $100,000 a month and have since 2014, and they are still his concierge doctors. That's the list of the medications he takes in one day that they prescribe. That doesn't include the cocaine. It doesn't include the ecstasy, the MDMA, the mushrooms, and all of the others. Now, It's during these rages that Mr. Depp engaged in verbal, emotional, physical, and sexual abuse of Amber. Let me introduce you to Amber, the lesser-known person here, and I know when we were doing the voir dire, none of you had even watched as much as 3 of her movies, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Amber. She's 35 years old. She's from Austin, Texas. She grew up outside of Austin, Texas. She has a daughter, Una, who turned 1 last week. Amber grew up in an area, her father was a construction worker, primarily a painter, but he would break horses as part-time. They lived out on a ranch area. Her mother, Paige, who died 2 years ago at age 63, dropped out of medical school to marry Amber's father. She worked for the state of Texas in internet communications. They grew up very poor. Amber has a sister, Whitney, who's 16 months younger than her. And you will see and hear from Whitney later because unfortunately she also witnessed some of the abuse. Amber rode horses with her father. She tried to work with him to help him break the horses. She remembers having a broken arm at least 4 times, being in casts during that time. But there were some things she learned from breaking those horses that was very significant. Her father taught her she couldn't show fear, she couldn't show pain, and she couldn't show emotion. That's how she could break those horses. It's significant for you to know that so you can understand how Amber could have remained in this relationship with Mr. Depp for as long as she could and the dynamics of some of the abuse you're going to hear about, because that's what would be her instinct, is to stand up and not let him show that he's caused the pain, that he's caused the fear, that he's caused the humiliation. You'll hear about a long line of jobs that Amber started from back, age 12 as soon as she could, working in a soup kitchen. Well, that was volunteer, but then she took all kinds of miscellaneous jobs, lifeguards, everything else, trying to improve herself. She's not somebody who had a great break. What happened was she got recognized by a Hollywood agent who expressed some interest in her. She took her $180 that she'd saved up and she went to LA. That's all she had to her name. The testimony will be she worked all kinds of different jobs when she was in LA, anything that she could get. And she would go on, but she didn't have a vehicle, so she would go on buses, and she'd go up to six different auditions in one day. She'd have a map, and she'd have the bus, and then she would just go around. She had a big sweater, so she could change underneath it to whatever the role was, so that she could get things. And she wasn't going for famous actor roles. She was taking one-liners, she was taking extras, she was doing anything she could to make money to survive. And then you know what she did with it? She gave a bunch of it back to her parents. She started helping support them. Then when Whitney graduated from high school, she brought her out to LA and put a roof over her house and put her through community college. She took care of her family with what she made. When she met Johnny Depp in 2009, when he hired her for Rum Diaries to star across from him, she felt like she was pretty successful. She'd starred in some roles. She had an apartment. She had a vehicle, a Mustang. She could go to Starbucks. She could afford Starbucks. She viewed herself as doing pretty well at that point. Now, during the Rum Diaries, she got to know Mr. Depp. Not true that she was pursuing him or anything else. She was in a long-term relationship with Tasha Van Ray, and he was in a long-term relationship with Vanessa Paradis. Neither of them had any kind of romantic relationship at that time. When she departed from the Rum Diaries in 2009, Johnny started pursuing her. In fact, he sent her a number of gifts. One of them was a guitar, and she returned it. Now, 2 years later, fast forward, that's when the press junket started. And that's when she had to come back and meet with him, and they ran on the press tours. At that point, she had ended the relationship with Tasha Van Rie, and he said he had ended his relationship with Vanessa Paradis. So during the press trips, that's when they started dating, and by both accounts, fell madly in love. She loved the side of Johnny that we see in the movies, the charismatic one, the charming one, the generous one. That's the man she fell in love with. But sadly, the monster came in the way. And that monster would come out when he was drinking and when he would take the drugs. Amber will never forget the first event of abuse. She was sitting in his house in Sweetser on the sofa, and he was across from her. And they were talking about a tattoo that he had that had Winona Ryder, forever. He had altered that to Wine Forever after he broke up with Winona Ryder. Just an aside, he had Slim, which was his nickname for Amber. When they broke up, he turned it to Scum. But in any event, he had that on there, and Amber thought he was making a joke when he was talking about it, and she laughed. And he up and slapped her. Now you see the rings that Mr. Depp has on him hurts when he slaps. And she was stunned. She had no idea what to think. And she kind of laughed thinking, well, maybe that was a joke. What just happened? And he slapped her again. And then she just froze and just looked. And then he hit her again, and this time it knocked her right off the sofa onto the ground. And she remembers her face was in this dirty, filthy carpet. That's what she remembers and fixated on, the dirty carpet. And she's thinking, oh my God, I have to leave. I have to leave. But I love him. I have to leave. But I love him. And she sat there for the longest time. She laid there for the longest time. Then Johnny came off the sofa, got on his knees, started crying, told her he was very, very sorry that he had done this. It would never happen again. And he said some very significant words. I thought I had put the monster away for good. That's what he said to her that day. Well, Amber ended up leaving that day, and she went out to her car, her Mustang, and she remembers that it was cold, and she sat in the car for the longest time, and she remembers watching her breath because it was cold, and she was thinking, I have to leave him, but I love him. She just kept thinking that. She finally drove away. But Amber made the mistake that millions before her and millions after her have, who are victims of domestic abuse. She chose to stay and try to fix the problem, and thinking that she could do that. So she stayed. Now, Amber was also, she grew up in an abusive family. Her father abused her mother, and sometimes she and Whitney. So she had that cycle in there, just as you've heard that Johnny had that cycle in his house. And so what's the normal to them is a little bit more difficult than some of us can understand. You will hear expert witness testimony about the cycles of violence and what happens with these people and how they react and all the dynamics of thinking they can fix them. She thought all the way through she could fix them. If she can just get them sober and clean, then everything was going to be that wonderful side that she fell madly in love with. And she kept trying, and she kept trying. She went to Al-Anon meetings. She went to therapists. She tried to do couples therapy. You'll hear about their tape recording sessions to try to resolve fights or de-escalate them so he wouldn't get mad at her for anything. But you'll hear that he gets mad at her for all kinds of things. But he didn't want her to work. Here she's a budding actor who wants to be out there and succeed, and he doesn't want her to take roles. He starts controlling what she wears. He starts looking at her lines when she tries out for places. He nixes any romance scenes, sex scenes. He gets mad and accuses her of sleeping with every single one of her co-stars. It became a cycle of that, a control as well, emotional abuse as you go. But what's also significant in that is the property damage. And that's a hard one for Mr. Depp to be able to escape when he's claiming that he's such a docile thing and that it's all misheard. You're going to see pictures. He writes on mirrors, horrible things to her, writes on lampshades, on clothing, on countertops. In Australia, when you heard Ben talk about Australia, he wrote, the third day, as Amber comes out after she's barricaded herself and gone through a lot, and I'll back up on that in a minute, she comes out, he's got mashed potatoes spread across the top. He's written along the wall of the staircase going down all kinds of nasty things about her, and Billy Bob Thornton, the last one she was in a co-star with, and fucking ambition and all kinds of things like that. And then he's written on the lampshades downstairs, and then he's got more on the mirrors. And then, on top of it, you've got all the broken glass everywhere, and you've got the liquor everywhere, and it's just, and then he's tried to urinate messages to her. That's the Johnny Depp. That's the other side. Now, you're going to hear that Amber tried to protect him all the way through. She didn't want the public to know this. She didn't want his kids to know this. And so she didn't tell people about it. So let's go back. The first event that I told you about was 2011. And how do we know that it was in 2011? Because Amber was going to her therapist, Bonnie Jacobs. And Bonnie Jacobs has therapy notes of her sessions with Amber. And in those therapy notes, she chronicles the first time that Amber tells her that Johnny hit her. And it goes through into 2012, 2013, 2014. And you will see, and you will hear from Bonnie Jacobs, her saying, you know, this is a cycle of violence. This is a cycle of abuse. You can't enable him. You need to stand up for yourself. Amber will testify about how Johnny would get so drunk and so drugged out that he would vomit all over himself and worse, lose control of his bowels. She would clean him up. And you'll see Bonnie Jacobs in these notes saying, don't do that. You're enabling him. Don't do it. Leave him there. But what would happen was his handlers would then take care of him if she left him. So that's the story you're going to hear on that. Let me just tell you about a few of the events, and I'm going to start in Australia. That's the 3-day hostage. She gets there. Now, you will hear Mr. Depp testify under oath that for 15 to 18 months before the March 2015 Australia event, when he's there filming, that he's been sober, clean and sober. Then you'll see all the text messages for the last 18 months in which he's scoring drugs, in which you'll hear testimony from people in which he's gotten drunk and you know, taken all kinds of different drugs. The whole time. He doesn't get clean and sober. But he claims that he was clean and sober, that she came there. This is a month after they just got married. She flew in from filming The Danish Girls. She's there, and he claims that he was just sitting there calmly, and she was haranguing him. So he took a shot glass of vodka. And when he did that, she got mad, took the bottle of vodka, was 8 to 10 feet, about where I am from you, and hurled it at him, and it happened to just take off the bottom part of his finger. And then he says she came and burned a hole in his cheek. The testimony is going to be that he self-mutilated on a number of occasions and burned himself in the cheek and also cut himself. But Amber never did that. And you're going to hear from the experts testifying about this finger injury and how fantastic this version is. But the other part of it was he was with Marilyn Manson for the week before, scoring on cocaine. You'll see text messages of him getting it from his handlers, the cocaine and the liquor. And you'll hear so much before that. But Amber gets there, and instead what he does is he takes 8 to 10 tablets of ecstasy almost immediately. And the next 3 days are just a cycle of very, very, very violent activity by him. Amber keeps trying to calm him down. She tries to get him to eat. She tries to get him to sleep. She tries to do these things. And he would just, he was, at times delusional, paranoid. He would be, mad at somebody else. Then he'd be mad at her. And by the way, we'll talk about the prenup, but he called her lawyer, who she had because she wanted to give him a prenup, and then they got married too quickly, so she was going to give him a postnup. He called the lawyer from Australia, called her a bitch, and fired her. You'll hear the testimony from the lawyer on that. That's the type of Johnny Depp that was there. And he didn't want the postnup. He didn't want the prenup. But now they're going to tell you that it was her that was mad. You're going to hear she had a lawyer, and she was cooperating completely on that. So as you go through those 3 days of Australia, some pretty horrendous things happen to her. He rips off her nightgown. He has her jammed up against a bar. He has hurled bottles and bottles at her. He has dragged her across the floor on the broken bottles and the liquor. He has punched her. He has kicked her. He tells her he's going to fucking kill her. He fucking hates her. He's pounding at her, pounding her. And then he penetrates her with a liquor bottle. That's the Johnny Depp that you're going to hear about in this case. Now, after that, Amber goes to the airport, and what does she do? She buys a book by a psychiatrist who's talking about couples therapy. She's already trying to figure out a way to fix it again, fix this marriage that's only a month old and her husband has just done these horrible things to her. Now they go back to L.A. He's got to get his finger fixed, so he has to stop filming Pirates 5. They get there, and there's another fight in just 2 weeks from there. He's still using at this point. He's still drunk. But Amber finds on a TV screen, his monitor, she finds pictures of another woman, naked pictures of a woman, and text messages which show that he's clearly having an affair. She gets extremely mad. Amber can be jealous too. She can get angry. She's half his age, and she's defiant. And we're not going to say she's perfect. She was mad as can be when she saw that, and she confronted him. The two of them were screaming at each other. Now her sister Whitney happened to be in the house. She was summoned. She literally was awakened to come and try to resolve this fight between the two of them. While she's there, Johnny starts hitting Amber, and Whitney ends up getting in between them. And Amber thinks that Johnny's going to throw her down, push her down the stairs because he's in that position. So Amber actually gets up and punches Johnny in the face. She'll tell you that's the only time she has ever laid one on him, in an aggressive manner. But it's after he's already been hitting her, and it's in defense of her sister. And she'll admit she got him that time, and she actually did have an impact on him. She'll testify about how many times they were in their fights, and she said, she's almost half his size. So she said, if I pushed him, he doesn't move. He pushes me, I go flying across the room. There isn't any, ability on her part to be the abuser. What she'll also tell you is it took her a while to ever fight back. That many times before that, she would do what she did when she was breaking the horses. She wouldn't show fear. She wouldn't show pain. She would look at him. She would just be defiant, and all it would do was piss him off more. She'll tell you that she tried everything. She tried everything, from trying to be nice, trying to get away from him. She would throw things in his way to get him from running after her. She would try to, flail back. She would use her hands and legs, and she would go and try to fight him. She'd run into her room and try to barricade and push his hands and everything out of there. She'd try all those things, but she couldn't figure out what could get him to calm down. I'm going to fast forward now to the next one, and that is I'm going to jump you up to after the stair incident, and Johnny had to get surgery on his finger. That's the longest period of time he stayed sober. It was almost 3 months. You're going to hear that he has never been through rehab, even though he has been a lifelong drug addict and alcoholic. Never has he gone through a rehab plan. Instead, there's twice that he went to some New York hospital and did a cleansing. One time it was for 3 days, and one time it was for 5 days, and that's it. He's never made any effort whatsoever to get sober or stop the drugs. But this particular time, he did for almost 3 months. And you'll see the text messages. We're going to take you through this whole story and all the text messages and all the emails and all the testimony that you're going to get. So fast forward to December 2015. That was one of the worst. Australia was pretty bad, but this one was even worse. In this particular